They were not Greeks. They were not Latins. They were something else, something older, stranger, and deeply set apart. Mommsen opens his account of the Etruscans by stressing their profound distinctiveness. Their art, their rituals, their very physical appearance, as preserved in sculpture and funerary art, defied the aesthetic norms of the ancient Mediterranean. The Etruscan figure is not idealized like the Greek. He is compact, square, with a large head and robust limbs. It is a body not made for philosophy or leisure, but for ritual and labor. Their culture bore no resemblance to the elegance of Attica or the spare practicality of Latium. Etruscan religion, in particular, was a world unto itself. Ominous, mathematical, and obsessive, it mapped the will of the gods not through prayer or myth, but through numbers, intervals, lightning strikes. They did not honor their deities, they interrogated them. Divination was not an act of hope, it was an exact science, dark in tone, meticulous in method. Their temples, though influential in their design, carried meanings utterly foreign to Roman clarity or Hellenic grace. The sacred space was marked not by openness, but by enclosure. Their gods were not merely divine. They were obscure, at times terrifying. Mommsen calls their spiritual imagination gloomy and fantastic. He is not being dismissive. He is highlighting a worldview fundamentally at odds with the surrounding Italic cultures. The Etruscans did not explain the world. They sought to master its signs, its symbols, its unseen forces. And in doing so, they created a religious system unique in the ancient world, one that impressed the Romans even as it unsettled them. Their customs, too, were alien. They ate reclining, like the Greeks, but allowed women to share the banquet couches, a practice considered scandalous by their neighbors. Their tombs, carved in stone, were replicas of the houses they lived in, filled with painted scenes of banquets, musicians, games, and sometimes cruel punishments, a complete vision of the world beyond, vividly imagined. The Etruscans were not just different. They were self-contained. They resisted assimilation because they had no need for it. Their traditions were ancient, their rituals exacting, their pride in their own ways evident in every surviving artifact. And so, when Rome absorbed Etruscan institutions, it did so not from equals, but from a civilization cloaked in mystery and marked by difference. They left behind thousands of inscriptions, and yet their voice remains muted. The language of the Etruscans is one of ancient history's most enduring mysteries. It is not Indo-European. It bears no clear relation to Greek, Latin, or any of the Italic dialects surrounding it. For all the carved funerary texts, for all the dedicatory offerings and votive plaques, the Etruscan tongue continues to elude full understanding. Mommsen treats this linguistic isolation as more than a puzzle. It is a mark of civilizational uniqueness. The Etruscans were not just culturally distinct. They spoke in a language that set them apart even at the level of thought. Their alphabet was adapted from Greek models, but their phonetics followed a different logic. Over time, the language grew more clipped, more guttural. Words shortened, consonants hardened. The older forms, soft, open, and vowel-heavy, gave way to abbreviations, to variants like Minerva for Minerva and Tarchnaf for Tarquinius. This shift, Mommsen observes, was not just linguistic drift. It reflected a deeper cultural inwardness, a self-enclosed system of meaning. The Etruscans were not concerned with being understood by outsiders. Their writing served religious, legal, and funerary functions, inscriptions meant to record, to bind, to preserve, not to communicate across cultures. Attempts to link their language with Anatolian or Aegean roots, like the theory that they were Lydians exiled from Asia Minor, persisted even in antiquity. But Mommsen remained skeptical. The language, in its structure and in its insularity, points not to migration, but to isolation. These were a people who emerged and developed in place, surrounded but undisturbed by the linguistic transformations sweeping the rest of Italy. And yet, the Etruscan script shaped others. The Latin alphabet itself descends from an Etruscan intermediary. Their letters moved into the Roman world even as their meanings remained locked. This paradox, an unreadable language that gave rise to readable forms, captures the Etruscan position in Roman history, foundational yet veiled. In the Etruscan tongue, Rome inherited form without content, a script without a voice, a past it could copy but never entirely claim. Where did they come from? The question followed the Etruscans in antiquity, and it haunts their history still. Mommsen lays out the two dominant ancient explanations. One, from Herodotus, claims they came from Lydia, fleeing famine, crossing the sea, settling in Italy as exiles turned founders. The other, from Dionysius of Halicarnassus, asserts that they were native, born of the soil of Italy, their roots stretching back beyond record. Both theories reflect the Etruscans' strangeness. Their language, their rituals, their physical appearance, none fit cleanly into the Greco-Roman framework. And so, explanation became projection. The Greeks imagined them as displaced cousins. The Romans, perhaps uneasily, accepted them as ancient neighbors too different to fully absorb. Mommsen refuses easy answers. He leans toward the hypothesis of autochthony, that the Etruscans developed in place, apart from the migrations and invasions that shaped the rest of the peninsula. Their language supports it, unique, unattached. Their religious system, elaborate and indigenous, shows no sign of importation. Their myths, their iconography, even their architectural forms bear no decisive marks of Anatolian origin. There may have been contact, yes, but contact does not mean colonization. The Eastern theory is appealing to those who assume that cultural sophistication must be borrowed. But the Etruscans, like the Egyptians or the Chinese, may have developed complexity independently, not as imitators, but as islands of invention in a sea of repetition. The Etruscans, in this reading, are not migrants. They are survivors of an older Italic layer, one that remained untouched long enough to build its own world and strong enough to defend it until Rome. Mommsen's caution is historiographical. He recognizes the temptation to mythologize origins, but he insists on limits. Without solid linguistic or archaeological evidence, speculation becomes distortion. Better, he argues, to understand the Etruscans not by where they came from, but by what they built and how that building set them apart from every other people in Italy. Their origins remain obscure, but their singularity, that, Mommsen says, is beyond dispute. The Etruscans expanded, ambitiously, widely, but never as one. Mommsen charts the arc of their territorial reach with clarity. At their height, the Etruscans controlled a vast corridor stretching from the Arno in the north to the Tiber in the south. They established powerful cities, Veii, Tarquinii, Clusium, Volsci, each a fortified node of wealth and ritual. Beyond the central block of Etruria, their influence pushed outward into Campania in the south, and over the Apennines toward the Po Valley in the north. They reached far, but they never unified. Unlike Rome, whose strength would come from political centralization and administrative cohesion, the Etruscans remained a federation of independent city-states, occasionally aligned, more often divided. Their unity was ceremonial, not strategic. Religious congresses brought them together. Military coordination did not. Mommsen identifies this decentralization as their fatal flaw. Their cities were rich, their artisans skilled, their armies capable, but their inability to act in concert allowed smaller, more cohesive powers to overtake them. When conflict erupted with the Greeks in southern Italy or with the rising Romans in Latium, the Etruscan response was disjointed, delayed, and ultimately insufficient. Their political structure was aristocratic and priestly. Power resided in a ruling elite, often centered around powerful families who combined religious, military, and economic authority. The kings, or lucumones, were not emperors, but magistrates backed by sacred rights and ancestral prestige. The weight of tradition was heavy, innovation cautious. In this, they resembled the early Roman patriciate more than the tyrants of Syracuse or Corinth. But where Rome forged institutions that could evolve, the Etruscans remained fixed, ritually bound, politically fragmented. Their colonies in Campania, like Capua, succeeded for a time, bringing Etruscan influence deep into the south. But distance, local resistance, and internal disunity made these expansions fragile. Over time, Greek maritime power and Oscan tribal pressure eroded their southern holdings. In the north, Celtic incursions displaced them entirely. Mommsen's assessment is unambiguous. The Etruscans had the tools of greatness, wealth, knowledge, power, but lacked the architecture to sustain it. Their civilization was expansive, but not imperial, advanced, but not coordinated. And so they waned, not through sudden collapse, but through the slow erosion of a system that could not adapt fast enough to the world closing in around it. Rome did not invent itself. It inherited, and much of what it inherited came from the Etruscans. Mommsen makes the case plainly. The early Roman state, particularly under the Tarquin kings, was profoundly shaped by Etruscan institutions, symbols, and worldviews. This influence did not arrive as foreign domination, but as structural adoption, elements of Etruscan culture repurposed and embedded into the Roman political and religious framework. The kingly power of early Rome, regnum, owed much to the Etruscan model of the lucumo, the magistrate priest who ruled by sacred authority as much as by force. The Roman practice of augury, of interpreting the will of the gods through signs and omens, is directly descended from the Etruscan discipline, a complex body of ritual knowledge passed down in books said to have divine origin. Rome also borrowed the visual language of Etruscan rule. The fasces, a bundle of rods symbolizing authority and later adopted by the Roman magistrates, is Etruscan. So too are the lictors, the attendants who flanked Roman officials. Even the triumphal procession, that cornerstone of Roman political theater, finds its prototype in Etruscan ceremonial display. Architecture bore the imprint as well. The arch, so vital to Roman engineering and aesthetics, was first mastered by Etruscan builders. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's vast subterranean drainage system, began under Etruscan kings, an infrastructure project not of convenience, but of statecraft and spectacle. It showcased control over nature, just as their temples asserted control over the divine. Etruscan religion did not just enter Rome, it was institutionalized. The College of Haruspices, priests trained to read omens from animal entrails, remained an Etruscan priesthood embedded in Roman life for centuries, consulted even in the days of the empire. Mommsen notes that Roman adoption was not passive. Rome transformed what it borrowed. Etruscan ceremony was stripped of excess and refitted to Roman values: order, discipline, utility. What had been mystical became procedural. What had been obscurantist became legalistic. But the imprint remained. Rome's early kings ruled in Etruscan style. Its early republic bore Etruscan tools. And even as the republic defined itself against monarchy, it retained the symbols of Etruscan power, transmuted, but unmistakable. The Etruscans faded. Rome endured. But Rome, in its foundations, still carried the bones of a civilization it had outlasted but never entirely left behind. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.